everyone, and welcome to Milwaukee's Tailgate Brewers podcast, part of the MKE Tailgate Network. This is episode 367. I'm James, joined by Ryan and Paul this week. Paul, good to have you back after you were away last week. How you been?
I'm just not going to answer that.
Fair. Yeah, we're in that period, I think, right now. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people feeling that. Yeah.
Yeah.
just
For those
existing.
who don't know, I feel like sometimes things happen that are so ridiculous that it's hard to actually express them to normal people without sounding insane.
Yeah.
But Elon Musk took over the United States Treasury on Friday night, and as of this morning, has been denying congressionally allocated payments to things he doesn't like, such as several Lutheran charities that run retirement homes in the Dakotas. He has gotten access to the entire U.S. Treasury payment system. This is a thing that has actually happened. It is extremely illegal, but nobody will do anything about it. And it is something everybody should know about, but I feel like isn't being reported very well. And you sound insane when you say it, but it's an actual thing that's happened, and everybody should be really, really, really mad about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I tried to articulate this yesterday, and I sounded so insane. I stopped, and I just I stopped because it sounds nuts, but it's yeah.
Well,
So that's not even that's not even close to the worst thing that's happened this week. So
No.
Yeah. On that note, let's try to at least distract ourselves maybe a little bit with some Brewers talk this week. Reminder, patrons get question priority on this podcast and on reporting as eligible. Patreon.com/MKE tailgate is where you go. $2 a month guarantees you get your questions answered both here and on reporting as eligible. $5 gets you the perk plus the additional exclusive content, including the Minor League Extra with Ryan and Spencer every month. So biggest Brewers news of the week coming out was the agreement with William Contreras to avoid arbitration. Kind of came unexpectedly over the weekend. So this is going to be his first year of arbitration. And the hearing was, I guess, coming up in about a week or so. So they got this done just before the hearing, sort of similar to the Devin Williams situation last year. The deal will pay Contreras $6 million this year with a $12 million option for next year, and that includes a $100,000 buyout. So that brings the total guarantee up to $6.1 million, and that is notable because it's basically the midpoint of his submission for $6.5 million for arbitration. The Brewers' offer of 5.6. It's also the second straight year, as we mentioned, where they ended up agreeing to terms after filing with the player, and both cases, the thing that got the deal done was that additional option year. Obviously, the Brewers ended up declining the option on Devin Williams. Second year option for Contreras being $12 million seems high considering, just precedent for second year arbitration catchers is what he'll be next year. But I guess, Ryan, what's your feeling on this deal, and what are the odds that the option actually gets picked up?
Well, first off, great that it's done and that we're not dealing with it. They were going to have a hearing this week, which seems earlier than in the past. I don't remember it being in the first week of February. But so that hearing is not going to happen. He doesn't have to sit and listen to the Brewers crap all over him and say how terrible he is. And so that's just a win for all concerned. I think that the settlement point is fine. I don't know if the Brewers got second thoughts about what their case would be if the more they looked at it, the more they thought about it, if they thought there was a significant risk that Contreras was going to win. And so maybe they thought, okay, we'll do the settlement. But yeah, the really interesting part of this is the $12 million figure, which we were talking to Spencer about. I'm gonna bring up some of the stuff he said when we were talking about this in our group chat on Friday night, because I was wondering, okay, so what's the comp for a second year arb case for a catcher? And the one that he brought up, he was like, well, the one that makes the most sense would be Will Smith of the Dodgers, who got 8.55, and that was the highest ever for a second year catcher. Because Posey signed an extension after his first RB year. So like Will Smith is the record at 8.55. Well, if that's the record, and Will Smith is a very good player, and sort of, I think, in a lot of ways similar to where Contreras is, especially offensively, sort of all around. And so if you look at that, like Contreras is maybe a little bit better, but Will Smith is also, I think, a better defender. So yeah, if 8.55 was the record for a catcher, 12 million seems exceptionally unlikely to get picked up unless Contreras goes like full on MVP this year, right? Like basically he's going to need to have like an MVP season for that option to be picked up by the Brewers, I would think, because otherwise he's going to be more in this 8.55 range. And we've already seen that the Brewers are perfectly happy to turn down an option when there's a few $1 million difference between that option and what the player would be projected to get in arbitration, because they just did it with Devin Williams this year. So yeah, the 12 million option seems like very unlikely to get picked up, and like it was simply a means to do this and still maintain their we're a file and trial club claim, right? Like it seems like they were trying to maintain within their own rules, and so they set this up as like a almost unattainable point of pickup, which is fine. That doesn't really matter. It's fine, but it's weird. It's different than what I was expecting.
It seems kind of pointless. I don't think it helps them maintain their trial and file thing at all. Who are you fooling with this other than yourself?
Right.
And the answer, I think, is no one. So I don't know. I feel like it's just something that you put. I wouldn't do that if you're not going to actually potentially exercise it. I agree, probably not if that's the true RB projection for a even very good catcher. It's just going to tick off your player more than anything else. It seems like a lot of I mean, it's great if it ends up being a good deal for them. That means William Contreras is amazing, but it just seems like a pointless, dumb negotiating tactic that is just going to create ill will around a process that already is good at creating ill will. So I don't know. I'm glad he's on the team. I'm glad he got his money. I do more than anything. I said I'd take this case. I would take Contreras into trial happily, and I do wonder if part of this is part of the settling on the Brewers' part is actually looking at the same thing and being like, I don't know about this one. I think we might actually lose this one. And when settlements happen, that's more than often the case behind why they happen.
Yeah, I think it was probably a dodgier situation than what they thought when they filed. I would guess they must have reevaluated. They looked at something, or this could simply be a case of like the owner stepping in and saying, settle this. I don't want to deal with the bad PR again. Like that wouldn't shock me if Etanasio was like, I don't need that press conference again. So let's not do it.
Yeah. Don't need to be irritating your best players annually. I mean, that's part of the point of arbitration, but if you can avoid it, that's why so many teams avoid it. Absolutely. All right. I guess the other team news this week was another minor signing, pitcher Josh Maciejewski. I had to go look up the Baseball Reference pronunciation for that one. Josh Maciejewski signed a minor league deal. He's a 29-year-old left-hander. He's been with the Yankees since being drafted in the 10th round in 2018. Made his big league debut last year with 7 pretty successful innings that were, I guess, better than what you'd expect based on what he did most of his time in AA and AAA. According to major MLB trade rumors, I should say, he averaged a 90.1 miles per hour on his sinker during his limited big league work. That checked in at 89.6 miles per hour during his AAA time. He also has a low 80s changeup and a mid 70s breaking ball. Seems like another kind of random lefty addition, Ryan. Anything interesting here that you see?
Yeah, I don't know. This seems like just another guy that is, because it's a minor league deal, he'll be around, and at some point he'll get promoted to the big leagues, and, probably for an injured player or something, he'll be in there for a little while. He might be kind of useful. But the thing is, last year he was, like I said, he was good, or like I put in the rundown, he was good in the big leagues. He had a 2.57 ERA over 7 innings and a 9 a 7-2 strikeout to walk ratio. So, I love those things. That's great. Like, but if you look at the underlying numbers in AA and AAA, we're talking about a guy who put up in the minor leagues last year, a 1.47 whip. So, like, not good. He was putting a lot of base runners on, 5.89 ERA. So I think this is purely just a depth thing. They'll see what they can do. I'm sure they probably have some idea that, like, there's things they can do to work with him and all of that. But I don't see this as being like Koenig. This is more like, I don't even know who's somebody who was around for like 2 innings and then just got booted. I think this is much more likely to be that, unless they can bring him in and all of a sudden he's throwing faster or something, because this is not a guy with big stuff.
Oh, did reference change how they list the age of the person in season? Because he turned 29 during last season. This is his age 30 season. He turns 30 on August 14th this year. He's old. When we get a guy like this randomly and he's like 25, 26, I'm like, all right, maybe this guy's 30 years old. Don't care. This is a depth piece. And his name is hard to pronounce, and I'm not going to spend any more time thinking about it.
Yeah, what reference does, and I think this still applies, the cutoff is July 1st.
July 1st.
So,
okay.
July 1st is what they use as the cutoff for what year it is. So he's an extremely old 29 this
Yes, he
year.
is.
Yeah.
Extremely old 29.
Yeah, I mean, he was drafted out of college in 2018. So,
2018.
Yeah.
Which in my brain is like, oh, it was only a couple of years ago. No, it was 6, almost 7 years ago now. That's a long time. All right. As before we get to questions, interesting graphic that was kind of floating around on Blue Sky, looking at team WRC plus projections. This comes from Derek Carty's The Bat, and the results for the Brewers are, I think it's safe to say, pretty concerning, although maybe not surprising. They were ranked 25th in the MLB in majors with a 95 projected WRC plus and only 158 projected home runs. Paul, we've been worried about the offense for a while and replacing power specifically. This doesn't help your concerns, does it?
No, and I think that it's just a very logical projection. Anything other than this for the current Brewer offense would be wish casting. I mean, you can maybe project that Jackson Chourio will go up a little bit, but he hit 21 home runs last year. What's he going to go up? Like in a best case, not best case, but in a good scenario, what, like 9? Probably like 30-ish, give or take. They lost Willie Adames, who hit 32 last year. It's just not a good offense. Like, it just isn't. They definitely need to add power to it. We've been saying it all year. Anything that looks different than this in terms of WRC plus projection or home run projection or anything else is lying to you. So they might still be an okay team with pitching and defense, but the offense is bad. Like, a lot of these guys aren't good at hitting. So it's concerning only because it's another data point confirming what we already suspect to be the case. It's not good. It's bad.
Yeah, I think this overplays it at least a little bit. I'm going to make the case for that in just a second here. I'm trying to get my data all lined up. So if you look at what they did last year, the guys who are coming back and, whatever, William Contreras put up a 131 WRC plus. Jackson Chourio put up a 117, though obviously that also includes that first 2 months, which doesn't seem all that representative of what he was, because he was he was around 135 after those first 2 months. He was much higher than that. And then you have somebody like Joey Ortiz, who is at a 104. You have Rhys Hoskins, who is actually 100, so was average. Obviously, Willie Adames is no longer on the team. That's the big hole that is missing there. So I think my level of concern about this, I think they still have work to do. They do need to improve the offense. That does need to happen. But I think it's a little bit hard, because where are the spots in this lineup where you're expecting to get a 70? Where are you expecting to get like a 60 to a 70 from a spot in the lineup because I'm not seeing those. And to balance out like what we're expecting from Contreras and Chourio, sort of up at the top of things, and you can throw in Garrett Mitchell there too. I don't know exactly what to expect from Garrett Mitchell either, but I think he was around like 117. He's not. I got to change my qualified here. We'll set it to 0 and we'll get Garrett Mitchell in there. Where was Garrett Mitchell at? Garrett Mitchell was at a 126. Oh, and also Yelich last year had a 153, but we don't know what to expect and how much from Yelich and whatever from those guys. So like Mitchell, Yelich, you start adding in things like that to get down to a 95, if you're balancing off, a decent amount of guys who are solidly above 100, just mathematically, then you have to have some guys who are putting in really low numbers. And I think they have, like they kind of always do, they're generally avoiding the really low numbers. I guess the biggest concern I would have for a guy who could potentially get a lot of plate appearances and not hit would be Bryce Terang, right? Like that would be my concern because
Frelick.
I don't know that he would get a lot of plate appearances, though. I think they would start shading. If he's bad, I think he starts to lose plate appearances in a way that maybe Terang doesn't, just because his defense is so exceptional. And maybe Frelick does to an extent, too, because he also very good
how many did
defense.
Frelick have last year when he was bad but played exceptional defense?
Yeah, he had 524 plate appearances last year.
Yeah, and an 86 WRC plus. So,
yes.
But is that... Is that like a reasonable floor for him, or is he?
I don't think it is.
You think he could
go? That's a lot of balls falling in for him. Yeah.
You think it could go significantly lower than that?
I do. What's Sal's BABIP from last year? I don't have it up. I can pull it up.
306 was his BABIP last year. Which I mean, for a guy who has his speed, that's not. I mean, the league BABIP at this point is like 280, 290, but it's heavily dependent on speed. So like,
but you could randomly lose 20 points off that very, very easily just by things not falling in right, and then you're absolutely horrible.
Yeah, I mean, how far would it drop him? Is what I'm trying to figure out. Maybe to 80, something like that.
I think it gets you under 80 if that happens.
You think we also get under 80? Okay.
Didn't mention the person who's playing third base as an option for somebody who is a horrific offensive player.
Yeah, that's the biggest spot where they still I think they're still going to do something. I think we don't have that person on the roster. We were talking about that last week. I still think the person who's going to get the most plate appearances at third base this year is not yet on the roster.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that'd be great. but right now it's horrible offensive players combined. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Ollie Dunn last year had a 68 WRC plus for that.
Monasterio was bad too.
I just think also, there's more stuff to weigh on the high side of 95 that you're going to have a lot below it to drag down to that point.
Gary Sanchez actually matters too, which is unfortunate but true.
Yeah, Gary Sanchez last year was a 96. So
the DH spot's going to be harder to get value out of, especially if Yelich has problems health-wise again.
Yeah.
So they're vulnerable there too because they don't have any of those bats at any of the other power positions. Like it's just Yelich you're counting on for DH production, which also does matter. So I think you can get down to this forecast pretty easily. And if you're projecting Christian Yelich to make a lot of this right by playing 4 months out of the season, good luck with that.
Yeah, I think a lot of this does hinge on what you get from Christian Yelich, because if he comes out and is actually healthy and like the back thing at least temporarily sort of, gave him the ability to free up, what he's doing with his swing. If that is the case, then I think we've got 3 really good offensive players on the club, and it does start to then that projection becomes really hard. But if Yelich isn't able to give much of anything, or if Yelich is bad, then I think that the 95 becomes more realistic. So I think a lot of it does actually really hinge on Christian Yelich. The more I look at it, the more I think about it. Health is also going to really matter. Like they're putting a lot of eggs in the William Contreras, Jackson Chourio basket as well. Like
Yep.
those guys are going to be expected to carry the offense. So we will see. Before we get off of the Garrett Mitchell thing too much, I forgot to put it in the rundown, but I wanted to talk about it. Did you guys look at what the swing decision stuff that Kurt had written up this week in the JS? Because he singled out Garrett Mitchell as a really interesting guy. And I think that's worth talking about here a little bit. So basically what Kurt was looking at was this idea of swing decisions and whatever. And what he found was that Garrett Mitchell's a very, very interesting player in that his swing decisions are really well attuned to what he hits well. And so he will lay off pitches inside the strike zone that he doesn't particularly hit well, like the high fastball. We've talked about this extensively on here, especially with Spencer, that, the high fastball is Garrett Mitchell's kryptonite. And he has been working. We know, I don't know, Paul, was this on the podcast last week? And Spencer mentioned that there's a video of him working on hitting the high fastball. So Mitchell knows.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So Mitchell knows that this is a weakness of his, and he's working on it. But he's also very, very good. If you give him a breaking ball low, like that is that's where he's going to do damage. Like that's what he really does. And so that is what he's looking for. And he's very good at attacking the pitches he can hit and laying off the pitches he can't. But a lot of those are still in the strike zone. And so what it's leading to is this high strikeout rate. Last year, he struck out 31.7% of the time. Swing decisions are the Brewers' sort of bread and butter, though. This is, and that's how analytics teams are these days, is they really, really focus in on swing decisions. I think I first heard about this coming from like Cleveland. The Dodgers are big on stuff like this. Smart teams are really focusing in on this stuff. And the Brewers seem to have a really good handle on and a really good idea of what guys should and shouldn't be doing and how to coach it up. So it's interesting, right?
It is definitely interesting. I think, a lot of times when people look at strikeout rates and stuff like that, it's through the lens of, well, it's in the strike zone, you should swing at it, right? That means you can hit it. And that's really not the case for a lot of guys.
Yeah.
And, when I read Kurt's piece, which is fantastic, you should all go read that. A couple of pieces, actually. One explaining the methodology and one focusing in on Mitchell, like Ryan said. But when I read it, I was like, is this sort of like the secret sauce to their runner in scoring position success as well, right? Like we've talked about how above average they are, like leading the league in some instances of hitting so well with runners in scoring position. And I think this might have something to do with it, because they are just looking for stuff that they can do damage with, or just in those instances, maybe just get a run in. So,
well, and a pitcher with runners in scoring position has less leeway to miss. Like you're more likely to, this is the key thing, that you're much more likely to get that pitch that you actually are capable of hitting. And I think like that's the big like sort of insight. I mean, Kurt had a lot of insights in the post, but the question that you have to ask is, okay, why don't pitchers just throw him the things he can't hit that are in the strike zone all the time?
Right.
And the answer to that is it's not that easy. Not every pitcher's good at locating pitches every time. Pitchers have their own specialties with pitches that they're good at throwing versus pitches they're not good at throwing. It also reminded me a couple of years ago when the Giants were randomly good with all those old guys who didn't get hurt, and we heard a ton of information about their sort of swing development and their sort of sabermetric swing look, where they were like just
swing playing stuff.
Swing playing stuff where they had guys who were better at hitting balls that break down against pitchers who throw that, versus guys who are better at hitting high balls against pitchers who throw that. And it's pretty clear that there's been a huge increase in sophistication in hitting strategy over the last 5-10 years. And it would make sense that the Brewers would be into something like this, and that we might get fooled for a little bit on something like Garrett Mitchell's incredible strikeout rate, because historically it's been unplayable, but now maybe a symptom of something else. So everybody should read that 100%. And, we'll see if it does hold true. Like, this is one of those scenarios too, where you can make a prediction based on this information, which is that Mitchell should be able to keep this up. and have a high strikeout rate and still be a very valuable hitter. We'll see, though. Maybe the pitchers will bounce back and be, start working on specific strikeout pitches for specific hitters, and it won't work long term. But an interesting insight, and it's a reason to be more optimistic on Mitchell than we've been as a unit over the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a huge point, and it does start to explain like how this could be sustainable, how it might work long term, like you said. And I want to go back to the runners in scoring position thing, because I think you kind of said it. Maybe, Paul, I would have to go back and listen to this again. I'll be interested to hear exactly what you said. But I'm thinking, like, does the band of pitches that pitchers are willing to throw narrow when they're pitching to runners in scoring position? Are they not willing to throw their whole arsenal? Do they narrow that band, and have the Brewers picked up on something like that and have communicated that to the players and be like, okay, we know that he doesn't like going to this pitch. You can kind of discount that pitch as a possibility here. And something like that could explain like what they're focusing on and realizing that, because it would be natural that pitchers are going to abandon certain things when situations change. There's pitches that they will throw in certain situations and not in others. And if the Brewers have started to pick up on something like that, that could really be an explanation for the runners in scoring position thing, if they're picking up on stuff like that as well. So yeah, I thought that was glad you brought that up, because that's a really interesting, an interesting point, like a direction that this could go. But yeah, the Brewers, we know that they're thinking about things in a very advanced way, and that they're doing things in a very sort of precise and scientific way. And it is just interesting to see how that manifests itself, like in this runners in scoring position thing, where it just doesn't seem like it's necessarily a fluke. So yeah, it's cool to root for a team that has some stuff about it where you go, I don't understand how this works, but it seems to be working consistently. Because that's the better than the opposite of, we have all this talent on this team, why do they keep underperforming, that a lot of clubs kind of consistently deal with, where it's like there doesn't seem to be a plan. Think of the Angels, think of I don't know, the Padres to an extent, where it's like they seem to be less than the sum of their parts as opposed to being more than the sum of their parts. So it's at least interesting.
Definitely worth checking out Kurt's articles if you haven't already.
For sure.
All right. Before we jump into questions from this week, Ryan wanted to revisit one from last week, because we realized after recording we got so far down the rabbit hole on one that we missed part of it. But we talked about all the good results of the various pipeline polls that showed the Brewers ranked very highly in terms of drafting, trading for, signing, and developing players. But we didn't talk about the Baseball America survey that listed the Brewers as being, along with the Guardians and Orioles, among the quote-unquote most scout unfriendly organizations in MLB. So this seems like sort of a paradox, Ryan. How could this all be true?
Yeah, so to dig in a little bit, I went and read the full Baseball America article and really dug in on it to see most of the complaints of things that scouts are saying. I'll just give you like a sort of a sampling here of like what scouts are saying. Is scouts are feeling very underappreciated these days, and it's even more so than like what they would have been in the, say, Moneyball era, when I think they were still like a dominant force in the game. I think 20 years on, they have had their roles minimized, and there aren't as many scouting jobs as there used to be. You hear things like undervalued and misunderstood by ownership and decision makers, too many cooks in the kitchen, bad vibes all around, worry from young to old about the future of the profession and the overall health of the game. So that sort of sets the bar here for what people are concerned about. And specifically looking at, like which organizations are the most scout unfriendly, I didn't see when I was looking for like explanations for this. They didn't include, like with a lot of these polls, they included then comments from scouts. They didn't include comments from scouts here. They left out the comments for the most and least scout friendly. So the Dodgers, by the way, are up at the top. The Dodgers still maintain a huge scouting staff. And it's one of the things that they do in terms of, pushing their advantage. The Padres are also up there. The Royals, as you might expect, are up there. The Rockies, the Yankees, those are the teams sort of at the top. along with the Brewers, Orioles, Guardians. At the bottom are the Astros, Marlins, Red Sox. Then you have the Braves and the Cubs, and it's real interesting to see the Braves show up on there. I wonder if that's in the post, whoever their scouting director was, I forget his name, but he moved on to the Houston Astros. So I kind of wonder about that. So I don't know quite what to make of this. I know that the Brewers definitely did have a big changeover in scouting. They definitely got rid of a lot of scouts, especially on the pro side, like when David Stearns came in. And I think a lot of that has been replaced by analytics people who are working more out of Milwaukee as opposed to being boots on the ground going around. So I think that might be part of it. There's also the story, and I can't remember. I was trying to figure out where I had heard this, but there was also the story of I think it was the last year that Ray Montgomery was the scouting director, and how they had their draft board set up one way, the scouts and everybody left one night, and the next morning when everybody came back, the board was completely different, and somebody in the front office, like on the analytics side, had said, no, this is actually what we're going to do. And so they had reordered the draft board. So there's, I think, some things like that. But getting to the heart of this, what's really interesting is right after which organizations are the least scout friendly, and the Brewers are listed as tied for second place on that with the Orioles. Which organizations are the best at identifying talent? And this is the same pool. You're asking the same scouts, which organizations are the best at identifying talent? And if you look, now they have their teams up towards the top. The Dodgers and Padres are up towards the top in getting mentions here. Then the Rays and Yankees. Okay, so some of the scouting-friendly organizations, the Orioles and Phillies, the Royals, and then the Brewers. So the Brewers are basically on the edge of the top 10 in terms of being the best at identifying talent by the scouts who say they're scout-unfriendly. So
something's working still. Yeah.
Right, and that's what I wanted to get to is they're doing something right here, because even the people who are mad at the Brewers for being quote unquote scout unfriendly, whatever that means, and they don't really define their terms here, but whatever that means, it's still the Brewers are still considered by those people to be good at identifying talent. So somehow it's still working out. And I think we could probably hazard some guesses at why that would be, Paul. But
I got a couple.
Yeah.
So first of all, I think we can't. You cannot overstate the Houston Astros' influence here. They were sort of pioneers at going lean on their scouting department when they were in the midst of the banging scandal dynasty. And the Brewers are certainly very Astros-like in how they do things. There's a lot of influence there. I do think the Astros publicly decided at some point they went too far with that. They were having just people go out and tape people, having it all the tapes sent back into headquarters, and did all their analysis there for a while with centralized staff versus having scouts out in the field. I know that they've gone bigger since then, but they're certainly still one of the leaner organizations, and you can see them down by the Brewers in the rankings. That's not a coincidence. But the second thing is, I think focusing back on the Dodgers being at the top, that there's this shift where scouting used to be just the only way that you could possibly ascertain talent at all. And what's flipped is that you can, I think, do a pretty high percentage of your scouting on just well-known prospects. A lot of people are going to do scouting for you. Analytics will do some of it for you. People have Billy Bean Analytics sucked at scouting, but things have gotten more sophisticated. Like you have all this data on, just how hard you throw and spin rates and stuff that you didn't have before on a lot of, not everybody, but a lot of guys. And so what's flipped is that traditional scouting is now more of a marginal value add, and analytics and sort of shared information is more of the sort of bulk starting place that everybody starts at. And so if you are one of the leaner organizations, either by philosophy or by just money, like the Brewers are, you're cutting at the margins. That's cutting out your giant scouting organization. Whereas if you're the Dodgers, and the Dodgers are obviously willing to throw $1 zillion at winning everything, it still pays for you to have scouts out in the field. And especially if you are smart enough to understand how to synthesize all that data into something useful, which the Dodgers certainly are, you can still gain some upper hand on everybody else by doing it. And I think that's really the explanation for why the Brewers are still good at this, but have given up on sort of a marginal value that they could have if they had more money and wanted to invest in it.
Yeah, I wonder if it's more about like that they're taking away tasks that used to be more scout. Like the scout was kind of the person on the ground who was the person sort of running what they're sort of the king of their domain, right? Like they sort of had this autonomy to like, I'm going to go see these guys and I'm going to then make recommendations and the organization is really going to listen to me. And that too many cooks in the kitchen thing strikes me as maybe that could be a thing, because I'm looking at the Brewers front office page here and they have a lot of still amateur scouts. Their amateur scouting department is over 20 people at this point. They have area scouts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. It looks like 19 area scouts that are still employed. And that's just on the amateur domestic side. That's not even getting into the international side, where it's that staff, the international scouting staff, looks like it's another like 25 people. So the Brewers still employ a lot of scouts, guys. Like there are a lot of scouts. By the way, did you know that the national regional scout for the Brewers is Brian Bullington? I think he was the number 1 overall draft pick of the Pirates back in like the very early aughts. But anyway, anyways. So the Brewers still actually do employ a lot of scouts. They have a lot of these people. And I think especially down in Latin America, like they're doing so well in Latin America at this point. They're just really, really doing such a tremendous job and such a high hit rate. And it looks like we're looking at another one with Braylon Antunez. Like, fingers crossed. I'm feeling pretty good about that. They just have so many different people out there that it can't be that. I think that a big part of this is probably autonomy, and also I would hazard a guess that I'm not seeing on scouting. I'm not seeing a pro scouting department.
Sure.
I see scouting, and I think that was the big thing that they did, was they got rid of like the pro scouting department and they brought it into the realm of like analysis, because I don't see, they don't list, and they have scouting special assistants. I'm not seeing any sort of, so I wonder if that's also it. Probably this is a pro scouting thing, and pro scouting is with all of the data, because you're going to have excellent data now on pro scouting. So that's the minor leagues and major leagues. I feel like that is probably an area where you don't need to have boots on the ground in the way you used to, that you can get most of the information you want on guys who are in systems. You can get that information from, you can get that information from more of an analytics side than you can. I would still think there's value in having some guys out there, some boots on the ground, to be out there looking at various things and looking at teams. And I'm sure that they probably can go ahead and reassign some of these amateur scouts to doing pro scouting tasks, like after the draft is done. I'm sure some of that sort of stuff goes on, but I don't have definite answers on that stuff. But yeah, it is definitely, it's notable that the pro scouting side, I think the Brewers rating in particular here probably relates to their shifting very strongly away from pro scouting.
All right, moving on to this week's Patreon questions. First, we have Adam Post asking, is it just recency bias, or is this truly the boringest offseason the Brewers have ever had? How do the number of transactions and prominent stories actually compare to previous off seasons over the last 10 years or so? I don't have the numbers in front of me. I don't know if either of you guys do, but it definitely does seem maybe slower than even usual recently. Like, we're past the usual Yelly K-anniversary, right? We're into February now, and there still hasn't been a full MLB contract offered to a free agent. Obviously, still some out there, still some time before pitchers and catchers report, but that's only a couple of weeks away. So I guess, Paul, your thoughts on this seems like an exceedingly quiet offseason.
I'm pretty sure that this is the most boring offseason. Well, at least since I paid attention to off seasons, I won't say my lifetime. Surely the early 2000s, late 1990s Brewers had more boring off seasons than this, but it's pretty rough. Like, we haven't even gotten a Gary Sanchez signing, like not even that level of signing has occurred. Arbitration has actually been pretty boring. Like, the Contreras news might be the most exciting thing that's happened. It's not great, and it is like we're into February now. There's one fewer free agent available who has a WAR above Mark Canha, so that's not good either. It's pretty bad. It's really quite dull. I think that objectively speaking, this one's pretty bad.
Yeah, I think it's got to be up there so far. I would still say that the way this team does things, they make moves in February. Hell, they make moves into March. So there's still the possibility. But with guys, we have a question coming up about this next, so I'll hold off. But with guys coming off the board, this was actually a pretty active week. Baseball had been in kind of a lull, and then there seemed to be like movement in the market, I think, especially spurred by some relievers getting,
right.
Like the Kirby Yates thing getting finalized with the Dodgers seemed to spur something, and then like a bunch of guys started to settle into various places, and Tanner Scott and goes to the Dodgers. So things started happening on that front that were maybe a little bit late moving, but there are still people out there. So there's still things they can do, and I'm expecting them to do. I don't think we're done with the roster stuff, but yeah. We should also mention that, the Devin Williams trade is a big significant thing that they did, but it's also in the category of that's a thing that doesn't really excite people.
I know that deal especially was like, okay, whatever.
Yeah. Especially if you're like a normie fan, though. I guess if you're a normie fan, like that's probably, you look at it and you go, oh, well, actually this pitcher that they got back from the Yankees, Nestor Cortez, is actually pretty good. So I think fans would kind of look at that, and they're probably like, you're especially like people, not people that listen to this podcast, but like, like more general fans aren't really going to know or really care about the idea that like, oh, but he only has 1 year left on his contract. That's not really something that a lot of people would pay attention to. So I guess that one is interesting, and like the Caleb Durbin of it all is like interesting. But if that's as interesting as it gets, that's pretty damn boring. So yeah, they something is going to happen. I maintain that this team always acts late. So they're going to do something, especially at third base, because it's just such an obvious spot that could be upgraded by players who are still out on the market.
All right, Jay Google, our next question, which was alluded to. One of the names going off the market in the last week was Wade Miley, a sentimental favorite who had expressed a desire to return to the Brewers. Apparently the desire was mutual, but the Cincinnati Reds gave him a better deal. So Jay's asking, why did they lose Miley to the Reds? Should we assume the Brewers are not going to spend significant money this offseason? Otherwise, the Ha-Sung Kim deal is also something that sounded like a perfect deal. That was the other one that, we had all hopped on that train of wanting Kim as like an ideal solution, and goes to Tampa Bay on a really modest deal. What was it, like 2 years, $28 million with an option? He is coming off a shoulder surgery, isn't available until May, but still, Paul, that seems like the ideal Brewers-y signing, and to not be in that race and then to lose out Wade Miley to the Reds is kind of a bummer of a week.
Yeah, it's not great. So the Miley thing, I don't know if they thought maybe they were like the only players, like if it was no other bidders, because Wade Miley's a little bit of a weird pitcher to have because he does get hurt every other year, basically. But the Reds are a team he's also pitched for, and also pitched for quite brilliantly, at least once. And, guys go to the highest bidder, especially if they have any affection for any. Wade Miley's played for like 10 teams. He has a lot of experience knowing who's a good organization and who's not. And he can do whatever he wants. He's only going to pitch for like one more season, probably at most. He's going to be 38. I think he's 38 already. I don't know. The Brewers don't fork over an extra $200,000 for guys who might not play that much, especially pitchers where they feel like they can crank out pitchers like nothing. That's fundamentally why they lost him. Like, the Brewers don't have affection. They don't do that. They are very hardcore in terms of miserly behavior. So that's why they lost him. And I'd like to have him. I like Wade Miley, and when he's right, especially when he's right for this team, he's quite good for this team. But I don't know. I'm sick of us losing free agents at this point. It's not surprising, and I wish him all the best on the Reds. Have you got, on the other half of this question, have you looked at the third basemen who are left yet? Because 75% of them have already played for us.
Right. Right.
The only third baseman available who hasn't played for us is Yoan Moncada. Every other third baseman who is still available has been a Brewer somewhat recently, and none of them are particularly good. So it's not looking good at that situation. It's going to be short or bust.
There's another guy, though. There's another guy in there, and that's Paul DeJong is a guy that I think would make a lot of sense because he gives them what they need more than anything, which would be home run power.
That would be great. Yes, he is traditionally a shortstop, but yeah.
And last year played third base primarily and was good defensively over there, like was above average defensively. So you don't lose it. He just seems to be a perfect fit for them. So I'm wondering, like, if that's a thing that it just makes so much sense. I know that Spencer and Jack really think that the Moncada thing could make sense. I wonder. Just that whole situation has been weird. He's been extremely hurt too. Like, that guy has had a huge trouble staying on the field and has never been good since his big breakout season, which was like 20.
It was like 5 years ago now.
Yeah, it was quite a while ago. One thing that I think I would point to with both of these guys to kind of say, so the last two off seasons, the Brewers, one of their big acquisitions was a guy coming off of major injury and surgery.
Yeah, it's worked out great.
And Jesse Winker and then Rhys Hoskins, and they've been burned in both cases by those deals. So especially in the Ha-Seong Kim case, I understand why they would be like, well, this guy isn't even going to be healthy to start the year. How long are we going to be waiting around? And like, if Ha-Seong Kim, who had a right shoulder issue, if that is like impeding his ability to throw the baseball, the Brewers already, and he would have to move to second base. The Brewers already have so many guys who just don't have the arm to play on the left side of the infield that, like, I could see that being a significant concern. So, like, Kim, I've been advocating all winter for, but like, if you look at their recent history, I would sort of understand if they were a little gun shy here, because this category of player, the injured player who is currently rehabbing off of a surgery, they've had some problems there the last couple of years, and it's not gone great for them. And so I guess I understand, especially like with the Kim thing, because it was, like you said, James, it was $29 million and it was with an opt-out. So if Kim is good, he leaves. If Kim is bad, he stays. And you get another year of him. And they just
the Rhys Hoskins deal. Yeah.
They just did this with Rhys Hoskins. They literally just did this with Rhys Hoskins, and like, we're all bemoaning that fact. So like, I get it from that perspective, but it is frustrating because Kim is a guy that I would have liked to have seen the Brewers go after and make a real play on, because if he is healthy, he would be good. But we'll see. If he's bad this year and the Rays, are stuck with a Ha-Seong Kim again for the next year, like, I wouldn't be surprised at all. So we'll see. But that one, I get the frustration because I was wanting that all off season as well. But I think the price of it just played the Brewers out of there.
Yeah. And I also wonder too, it's the second year thing. And we've talked about this with the TV deal, just kind of being a lame duck 1 year extension. They have no clue what the revenue is broadcast wise looking forward. So it's really hard for them to commit to multi-year deals at this point, even if it's just something as simple as that. I think that might be kind of, part of the reason they're reluctant to do some of these deals, but we'll see. Similarly, Nick Prill asking, from 1 to shortstop in 2011, how concerned are you about the third base situation? The spaghetti approach to roster depth hopefully ensures things will never get that bad again. If nobody rises to the occasion by June, are there any infield trade deadline candidates on your radar? So I guess, Paul, are we – I know you said the free agent list is dire. Are we at Unieski Betancourt levels of alarm here?
I guess not as long as DeYoung is out there, but yeah, we're getting pretty close because they've shown nothing so far. And I also think that they are, because they are non-sentimental and very bean countery, more willing to go into seasons with holes as long as their metrics are telling them that on the whole that they can be contenders. So I think there's at least a decent chance that they would be happy to go into the season with garbage at third base. And that does worry me. So we're not to panic levels yet, but we're like 2 players away from getting to panic levels, I think.
Yeah, so it was brought up on, I think, the Rates and Barrels podcast. I think DVR, one of them made a joke about Yandy Diaz to the Brewers. If we're talking about guys who could potentially be traded this year because he's in his last year with the Rays.
Yep. Brandon Lau also in his last year with the Rays as well, and maybe replaced by Ha-Seong Kim. So that could be a possibility.
Yeah, so there's some of these guys out there that you look at and you could go, because he was asking specifically about trades we could make in season, right?
Right.
He was asking about trades in season. So Diaz has 1 more year, and then it looks like there's a club $12 million option after that. And the Brewers have done deals with the Rays in the past. So, like, if the Rays are not in it this year, which I'm not really expecting, I think the Rays will probably be in it. But if the Rays were to fall out of it and they were to look to deal again, I could see a deal for Yandy Diaz. There's some other guys on here. Your Miguel Andujar's, your Giovanni Urshela's, Eugenio Suarez. Though I wouldn't anticipate Arizona being out of it. That would be weird. So that seems unlikely. But those are some of the guys who are third basemen who are eligible for free agency next year. Also, there's a guy coming over from Japan, supposedly, Munetaka Murakami. But he's only 25. Interesting. Don't know anything about him, but he was also sort of listed as potential free agents for 2026 at the third base position. So, yeah, Yandy Diaz is the shout here as a guy, like, if things were to play out the correct way, they could maybe make a deal for Yandy Diaz. And they've had good, even though it's always kind of dangerous to deal with the Rays. You always worry about those deals. They've had pretty good success doing it. Willie Adames came from the Rays, and Drew Rasmussen has been good when healthy, but he's also dealt with a lot of health issues because he's Drew Rasmussen.
Right.
So, like, they've done okay in these deals when they've been, making trades with the Rays. Savale will see how the shortstop, whose name escapes me right now, that they sent to the Rays for Savale last year. But, yeah, I could see Yandy.
Mark Podscarby next up this week asking, for a team who seems to value defense so much, why do the Brewers seem to not care about first base defense much? In the Stearns-Arnold regime, the only plus defensive first baseman I can remember was Carlos Santana for that 2-month stretch. Rhys Hoskins, Jake Bowers, Rowdy Tellez, Dan Vogelbach, Justin Smoke, Eric Thames, Jesus Aguilar, Chris Carter, all graded out as negative defenders during their time in Milwaukee. Paul, is kind of weird that they value defense so much everywhere else. First base just kind of seems like the spaghetti approach. I don't know what you think.
You know how Christian Yelich got nominated for a Gold Glove in left field 2 years ago?
Yes. Yeah.
And you know how you've all seen Christian Yelich actually play outfield defense, right? First base is where, first base is made up of 2 kinds of people. One is super great athletes who just hit a ton and are just too big to play anywhere else, really, but still can run and move and stuff like that. And then it's guys who hit a ton, but literally can't play anywhere else on the field, is like 60% of first basemen. And so the sort of age of just no hit, good field first baseman, it has been over for kind of a while. And part of it is just because, well, it's not easy to play. It like the Moneyball thing. It's covered adequately defensively by positioning, by second basemen who are much better at getting to balls than they used to be. It's just defense matters there, but it doesn't matter as much as it does anywhere else. And you actually have to pay a halfway decent premium to get a good defensive player there, because anybody who is good at defense at first base in the modern game is actually hitting generally enough to be very expensive. That's really what it comes down to. Like, all the guys we mentioned were available because they're not, like, Dan Vogelbach is available because he can barely stand on the field. Like, that's why he's there for the Brewers to get. They would actually have to invest some money or development to actually get somebody who was a good athlete to play over there. And their backups sometimes are. Like, I think Jake Bauers is okay defensively. I don't think he's great, but he can't hit at all. So, Doug Mankiewicz is dead. That's not what's available.
I was going to say Doug Mankiewicz is the gold standard of that you mentioned in my brain. Ryan, what do you think?
Well, I think basically the answer is because they value defense basically everywhere else. They have to have a position somewhere where they go, okay, we'll just accept what we get defensively here, and we just need somebody to hit. And for the most part, if you look at these guys, especially you go back a little bit further, Jesus Aguilar, Eric Thames, Chris Carter hit 40 home runs at first base. I know it was a different era and all of that, but like, those guys actually did give you pretty good offense. You got a good season out of Rowdy offensively. Like, there was a good season in there. There was also the bad, which is what people tend to remember. They were clearly prioritizing, obviously, when they got Hoskins, they were thinking this guy is going to hit better than what we had last year at first base. So they prioritized offense over what they knew was bad defense with Hoskins. And they decided to do that because I think they basically said, we have to prioritize offense somewhere. And so I think that's more the answer than anything else to why they've done it. I'm sure they would prefer a good defender at first base. We know that they were very interested in Goldschmidt this year, but they were saddled by the Rhys Hoskins situation, who they already had. The fact that you already had Rhys Hoskins and Christian Yelich under contract for this year meant Goldschmidt was just a luxury that they couldn't afford to go for, but we know they were interested in him. And we know that, like, when they had the chance to go out and get Carlos Santana, they did it, right? Like, they weren't dumb to the idea of the fact that they could get some defensive value. They've just prioritized offense generally, which makes sense given how they do it elsewhere.
Speaking of Rhys Hoskins, Michael Parr asking, what are your thoughts on the possibility of a Rhys Hoskins return to Philly form? Maybe I'm being optimistic, but another year removed from ACL surgery could get him back on both his OBP and his defense. I understand the wanting to be more, but also, Paul, he's going to be 32 this year. He was never really that great of a defender at first base with Philly. Right. I guess your hopes and dreams on Rhys Hoskins.
I think it's rational to hope for a bounce back on the bat. In fact, I think we did see that Rhys Hoskins can still hit when he's healthy early in the season, and really never got everything going later in the season. But the glove's not coming back because the glove really was never there. Like, he might get marginally better with the glove just because of general health and ability to move. But Rhys Hoskins is a below average defender. He will be a below average defender for the remainder of his major league career. And he will get worse every year because every single baseball player gets worse at defense after they turn like 26. So that is what it is. Hope for the bats, but the glove's going to suck.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Rhys Hoskins, his OPS pluses, and so it's going to be very similar to the WRC pluses as well, throughout history, going back to his rookie year was a very short stint where he was kind of outliery good. But starting in 2018, you've got a 129, a 112, a 149, a 130, I'm in the wrong column. You had starting in 2018, you had a 125, a 111, a 138, a 129, a 123. It wouldn't surprise me at all. And last year he fell to a 98 OPS plus, 100 WRC plus. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he bounced back to like 120. But yeah, he was never a good defender, like Paul said. So I'm not expecting miracles there. I think if you can manage him well, if you can give him enough rest and not have to have him out there. If he could play first base 3 days a week and maybe DH 2 days a week, that might be the best way to get like on a at bat basis the most out of his offense. So then the question becomes, who is it going to be offset with? Are we doing another year of Jake Bauers here? How does that fit with the roster? Those are open questions I don't have answers to. But I think a bounce back for the offense here, very possible, especially if you can be careful about how you deploy him. So we will see.
Jake Bauers is back on another minor league deal, so that seems at least like the realistic possibility to start the year.
Mm-hmm.
PJ Wessels asking, Everton scored twice as many goals as Liverpool. Toffees are gearing up for the derby. I have no idea what that means. Ryan, what NL Central team are the Brewers most likely to double up this season, meaning going at least 9-4? Ryan, what do you think?
Well, I mean, that's just like who's the worst team in the division, and I think we're all sort of in agreement. It's the Cardinals, right? Because the Cardinals are actually taking a step back here. They are one of the only other teams. I think it's the Brewers, the Cardinals, and...
Yeah, it's the Cardinals.
Yeah, it's the Cardinals. Like, the Pirates could still be bad.
I'd say the Pirates, too. Yeah.
But, like, they have Paul Skeens. They also have Jared Jones. And they have one of the top pitching prospects in baseball in Bubba Chandler, who is basically Major League ready, who we should see by, like, May. So their rotation is starting to look good. And they actually have some depth around those guys and seem to have figured. The Pirates guys seem to maybe be where the Brewers were, like, a decade ago in terms of, their pitching development has actually gotten kind of good. And people haven't necessarily noticed yet, but
they still can't hit.
They still can't hit. They don't seem to have that side of things even going in a positive direction. So... but they do seem to have some insight into how to deal with pitching. So, yeah, I think it's the Cardinals almost certainly. But It's also, when you're talking about 13 games, any stupid thing can happen. 13 out of 162 games, we could randomly run into an 11-2 season against the Cubs. Like who knows? Even though they're a good team. So, small sample stuff. But yeah, you would tend to think the worst teams, and I think the Cardinals are probably the last place team in this division because that's what they're trying to do.
Definitely depends on when you hit some of these teams too. Even the worst teams have a good couple of weeks here or there. The Brewers have been swept by the likes of the A's and such before. It just depends on when you catch certain teams. Ryan Ziegler asking, I read an article earlier today about the Brewers having led their division for the most consecutive days with only the Dodgers being ahead of them. Other than blind luck, what is it really going to take to get Milwaukee over the top? It feels like the Brewers and Packers are in a similar boat. Good enough to get close, but missing enough pieces to not go all the way. I forget what the time frame was on that, Paul, but I feel like it was like in the last 5 years or something like that. It is like the Dodgers and the Brewers in terms of leading their divisions.
Yeah. I don't really think they're in the same boat at all. The Packers, just in terms of pure talent, are on par with a ton of teams in football. And I think they need to make a couple tweaks and have some weaknesses, and you can listen to the other podcast for that. But the Brewers are different because the Dodgers are way more talented than they are. I think the Mets will be way more talented than all. Like big money teams are going to have more. The Brewers have led their division partially because they're well run with a good lean organization, but partially because their division's trash. They caught the Cardinals on a downswing. They caught the Cubs with owners who are unwilling to spend money in a giant market, and with the frickin' Reds and Pirates. It's much more about that than it is about them. And it's really hard to get over the top. One of the things that's happened in baseball with the expanded playoffs is in any individual series, you can luck into beating any other team, especially in the first round with its stupid 3-game garbage. But the problem the Brewers face is you don't need to just get lucky once anymore. You need to get lucky against the Phillies or the Mets, and then against the Mets or the Dodgers, and then against the Yankees. It's very difficult to get lucky in 3 consecutive series against teams that are just far better than you talent-wise. So to get over the top, they actually need to improve the underlying core of the team or just get incredibly lucky. But baseball's made it much harder for the teams that eke in as the nice, plucky, well-run underdogs to actually advance, because now you have to get lucky multiple times in a row against teams that are just far outpacing you talent-wise.
Yeah, and the thing is, it can happen, but is it going to be you? Or is it going to be the Diamondbacks in 2023, right? Like they were the Diamondbacks were not more talented than the Milwaukee Brewers. The Brewers were more talented. They were a better team than the Diamondbacks. They got beat in a 3-game series and ended up getting hot and rolling through a couple teams and took advantage of some, like the Dodgers, I think, who they beat were like injury ravaged. They had the injury ravaged rotation issues going on. And like they were just able to go through and do that. But even they in the final level, they got beat by the Rangers, who were a more talented, more expensive, just, generally had more top line talent than the Diamondbacks did. So the key here, I think I largely agree with that. I think the thing is, in the baseball postseason, there is more randomness than there are in most other postseasons, though. Ben Lindbergh was talking about this a little bit, I think, on Hang Up and Listen, about how the football postseason actually has a pretty decent amount of randomness. But then you look at something like Mahomes, and it's like that's the opposite of randomness. It's like Patrick Mahomes just keeps winning and taking them through. So I don't know. But there's a certain amount of randomness in like the football postseason too, because you're talking about one and done games, right? Like everything comes down to what happens in that 60 minutes of playing time. But yeah, it's a tough one. The main thing that the Brewers can do to improve that baseline talent then is to continue to do what they're doing, which is to be really good at drafting, developing, and bringing guys up, because you're not going to compete. The Brewers are not going to compete dollar for dollar with the Dodgers or the Mets or one of those teams. They're not going to spend that much money. That is not going to happen. So what they're going to have to do is rely on being able to do it from inside. And fortunately, they do have the infrastructure set up to do this, and it's proving out to be, quite successful. The question is just, can you get a critical mass together of everything to kind of fall together in, a few year period where like you have multiple guys who are on, a team cost control who are really, really good at the same time. Like, will Jesus Mate, be really good at a time when Churio is really good? If you got those two guys together being really good, that can work wonders for you. That can do a lot for you and set you up. But can you get that top end talent in a way that other organizations aren't? It's tough because the Brewers basically kind of have to do that through the international market as opposed to doing that through the draft. It's really hard to do it from the draft when you're drafting in the back half of the first round every time. So Andy McCullough brought this up on the Roundtable podcast in the last week or two, talking about the Dodgers, that the Dodgers have had to do this without ever, like the Dodgers are consistently drafting in the bottom half of the first round. That's when they get their first pick. And they've had to work around that to be the draft and development organization they are. And the Brewers have to deal with that to a pretty large extent too, because they're not picking high either. So it's a tough needle to thread. There's no doubt about that. They don't have the flexibility that the big markets do to do this.
Last few questions this week. We'll try to do them real quick before we all got to get out of here. Brian Polakowski saying, I believe Abner Uribe still has a 4-game MLB suspension to serve once healthy, since he never returned to the big leagues due to injury last season. Is Uribe a lock to make the opening day roster to serve his suspension, assuming he's healthy, regardless of how effective he looks in spring training, since the rest of the pen will be fresh? Or will they option him before opening day if he doesn't look ready and deal with the suspension later? That's an interesting theory, Paul, to just kind of get that out of the way early when you may not need him.
They might do that. I think, I don't know that the suspension is going to have a big impact on when they call up Uribe, although I will say this, it might make sense to get it out of the way early, because the way that they do operate with their relief pitchers like him is have him ready to come up at a moment's notice when they need to send guys down for rest and things like that. So I think it'd be smart. I think it's a good call. But I also think that other aspects of roster building may trump that, depending on how things shake out in spring training. If they have the spot available, it's not a bad idea. Just clear that sucker and then use the options to, bring him up and send him down. But I think it's a secondary concern.
Yep, 100%. Because in the first 5-6 days of the season, you have 3 off days. Because you have the opening day on Thursday, off day Friday, you play Saturday, Sunday, you're off Monday, and then you play Tuesday. Basically, you're not going to need a full bullpen at that point. So if you can do this, it is an interesting way to make this work. But Paul's right that it might also come down to needing to, because you can option him down, you needing to do that to maintain the depth that you want to maintain. If there's guys that you don't want to get rid of, that you don't want to have to cut from the roster, then you might not have this flexibility. I would imagine it also comes down to how good Uribe is in spring training in terms of like what he's doing in spring training. I think that's going to matter a lot too.
Yep. Ian Pomplin asking, John Axford is going up on the Wall of Honor. How do we feel about the criteria to get on the wall? Anyone you think should be on it and isn't, and vice versa. Anyone who shouldn't be on and is. Also, will Dave Parker be the only eligible player due to Hall of Fame to be left off the wall, or does he eventually make it on despite only 1 year on the team at the tail end of his career? So real quickly, the Wall of Honor is purely stat-based. You're on it if you just hit certain benchmarks, right? So that's 2,000 or more plate appearances, 1,000 or more innings pitched, 250 games pitched. If you win a MVP, a Cy Young, a Rookie of the Year, Reliever of the Year award, you get on there. If you manage a pennant-winning team, if you have a statue on the plaza, you get on the wall, which it seems like a no-brainer, being elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame. And then serving as primary broadcaster for 20 or more seasons after their playing career. That's like the Bob Uecker, Bill Schroeder criteria, right? And then serving as general manager for 10 years or more and reaching the postseason.
Yep.
So I guess, Paul, with that in mind, anybody missing that you need to see? Do you think Dave Parker gets on? What do you think?
I'd put Parker on mostly because there's a zillion people already on it, and honestly, the line's pretty low. You may as well. Plus, Dave Parker was awesome. He warmed up with a sledgehammer, and get K-Rod off my Wall of Honor. That's my only one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Parker is going to go on there. There's going to be a lot of sentiment around because of the Hall of Fame and because his fight with Parkinson's, especially after he passes away, I bet you it happens, which is not what.
Yeah.
He'll get on. So yeah, it's going to happen.
I wish T Plush was on it, but
oh yeah, they should change it. If you have a walk-off hit in the postseason, just
you
one,
should get on it.
You should get on it. Yeah, exactly. It's just basically the Remember Some Guys wall. So I mean, that should be the criteria. Tricky Henderson, last question, asking, I've heard you all discuss out of the park baseball, which I played in 2020 to cope with all that stuff and no MLB until I realized I'd have to quit my job to be good at OOTP. I play Stratomatic 365, the board game, and occasionally the new Strat Max. Do any of you play Stratomatic? What baseball simulation games do you recommend? Paul, anything that you play?
I did as a kid. It was really fun, but I got no time for that these days, so I don't play. I don't play anything. I really don't.
Yeah, I do play OOTP. I've never played Strat. There was some game I had as a kid that was kind of Strat-like. It wasn't Strat, but it was something that also incorporated sound. You played a tape with it. I don't even remember what it was called, but something like that. But yeah, OOTP is a huge time suck, which is fine at certain points. I don't have kids.
Same.
Like during the summers, it can be, something I'll play around with, or when I'm like he did, I played a lot of it in 2020 just to have something to do to keep my mind occupied instead of all of the craziness. So yeah, but yeah, never have played Strat.
Yeah, I'll play OOTP. I have it on my laptop. If my wife's watching her murder shows or something like that, I'll be playing on my laptop, or just have it as something to do kind of mindlessly, not taking it too seriously. But it is very in-depth. So if you don't have a ton of time to learn it, I can see how overwhelming it is. I've just been playing it for 10 years at this point. So, but definitely recommend that as well. All right. That'll do it for questions this week. Thank you to everybody for sending those in. A reminder, patreon.com/MKE tailgate, $2 a month. is all it takes to get your questions asked and answered on this podcast. If you're not a patron, you can support us another way. Go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else you listen to us, and give us a 5-star review while you're there. Also, be sure to hit the subscribe or follow button to make sure you never miss an episode, especially as spring training comes ever closer. So, in the words of Bob Uecker, hope springs eternity in the spring, and just a couple of weeks away from that. So can't wait. Hopefully before then, the Brewers will sign somebody. If they do, we'll talk about it here. Until then, everyone, have a good one. Stay well, and we'll see you next time here on Milwaukee's Tailgate.